Hey everyone, and welcome to Breakthrough Leadership. I'm Matt Young, and this is Greg Yates. Hey Greg.
How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, and here we are, Season 1, Episode 3 in the Breakthrough Leadership video blog here. And today's topic, Greg, we're going to talk about the number one most predictable way to achieve your vision. We always find a way to just create bold statements here.
Yep, big, bold statements.
I'm going to admit that we're going to make this much smaller. So I think people will be excited about what we're going to talk about. You know, I wanted to share, the video blog is not about this, but I wanted to share with you, I just got done with this book. Have you ever read this, Jim Collins, Good to Great?
Absolutely, many times.
All right, so it's a really good book,
It
undeniable, sold a ton of copies, everybody loves it. Let me ask you a question. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Have you integrated every one of these concepts in the book, in your companies, your life, and your organization?
No, but there's a lot of great ideas in there. Come on.
These are fantastic ideas that have proven to work over decades.
They're awareness. We've got awareness of all these ideas. We talk about them in meetings.
I feel like I'm really good at this book. Everything in it.
We can do the book. I'm not sure we can do anything that's in the book or everything that's in the book.
Yeah.
But we do know the book, right?
We know the book, and I'm just using that as a funny example to say, how many of us, Greg, have read great books, but then what happens?
Yeah, well, that's the classic, Matt. I mean, I did so much of that. You know, have you ever caught yourself saying, oh, I just finished this great book. I just finished this great book. It changes everything. Yeah. I mean, it just changes everything. You got to read it. Because if you read it, then we'll be on the same page, right?
I may or may not have done that even like yesterday to somebody, but
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's so exciting when you think about all the information. You know, Vicky, sometimes my wife, she'll say, oh yeah, I have just all kinds of useless knowledge. Yeah. That's what she'll say. But so often that's what happens, Matt, when we read and digest great information, but we don't know how to implement it.
Yep.
You know, we think we do. We think just by knowing it, we're going to automatically, it's just going to come out, right?
Yeah.
And we look for those chances that we can really bear down and say, oh, I know this one. I got this one. I got the answer, you know, because I read it. And it creates great conversation. But at some point, traction's got to exist that brings us from this vision that we had even while we were reading the book, right? I've done that. I'm reading it. I'm thinking, I see it. I can see it. But how do I get from here to there, right?
Like you said, you read a great book, you go to a seminar, you hear somebody great talk. We've even had conversations and you just have that vision and you go, I can see exactly what you're talking about and it feels as if it's already happened.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you have a great big vision, what we're going to talk about today is anyone can actually take that big vision and identify and leverage the smallest possible steps to achieve it. So let's just talk. So you've had a big vision, you got a big plan.
Yeah.
Where do you start? We're saying you can leverage the small increments. You've got a big goal, right? Whatever that may be. And what would you do, though, to guarantee success? I mean, when it comes to projects, I know you've been a part of these projects, Greg. 1,000 line items.
Yeah.
It's like overwhelming. Where do you start?
Yeah.
We're saying that the smallest step done consistently can lead to success. But let's start with our failures. Let's start there. Why do you think when it comes to vision casting, goal setting, strategic planning, why does it break down in your opinion?
Well, wow. That's a big question. That's a big question, Matt. But I think the biggest reason, my experience is that the biggest reason things like that break down, even when there's a clear vision, because we're talking about a clear vision, right? Everybody's on the same page. Let's just assume we actually managed to get that done. Whole nother discussion. Let's assume everybody's on the same page. Now we're moving in this general direction. But everybody's working on something different. Everybody's got a different viewpoint, a different vantage point, maybe a different way they play into the process. And something has to unite them as a team. Something, even if it's just me and you working on a project, has to be that common link that brings us back to a consensus, back to some place that we know we're gaining momentum when we see this happening.
And this is true, especially in complex projects, like you said.
Even more so.
Yeah, you have cross-functional teams, you have different timelines and all these things. But how do we know if we're really making traction? So one of the things that we want to talk about today is the value of increments and how the smallest possible step and how you could use that to your advantage. But one of the things with vision casting, strategic planning, goal setting isn't there a lot of getting ready to get ready?
Yeah, I'm getting ready to get ready. That's what they call the fix. I'm fixing to get ready, right? I'm fixing to get ready.
Right. That's
I even heard a guy one time say, "I'm repairing to get ready." I said, "What do you mean repairing?" He goes, "Well, it's where you're fixing something. I'm fixing to get ready." Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, we do that a lot. I mean, I'm guilty, man. I'm guilty. Have you ever caught yourself saying something like, "I feel like all the pieces of the puzzle are right there. If I could just figure out how they all go together." Keep going. Yeah. Keep walking. Keep going, because they don't all. If they all fit together today, I promise you tomorrow it'll look completely different.
Right.
The process of gaining traction is really just finding what the smallest common denominator is that's going to help you reach success. And I've seen that in big team projects where a leader was able to find one small thing that could unite the team on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. One small thing where everybody on the team could understand that they made progress that day. And why is progress important? Man, I mean, that's a big deal, right? I mean, how do we create momentum?
Yeah, so one thing is let's kind of break it down. One thing is if you identify the smallest possible increment, now you can get out of getting ready to get ready, because like you said, it's dangerous. You talked about this in an audio that you've done, or video that you've done. We call them Yates in your face, and you talked about the commander's intent. Yeah. So number one is we can't be getting ready to get ready because our plan is going to be different when it gets out there. So we got to get past that. The second thing that I think you were hinting at is if you're taking action, we're going to build momentum.
Right.
Is that where you're headed?
Yeah, they're really, I would argue that, I want to hear from people on this one. I would argue there are no big steps. There are no big steps. Every step is a vibration or a process of creating momentum that moves us where we need to go.
But wait a minute. Isn't it true that sometimes the guy gets on the plate in a baseball game, hits a home run? I mean, to me, that looks like there you got the home run hitters and then you got everybody else. But you're saying there is no really big step.
Well, the guy missed a lot of baseballs before he hit that home run. I promise you. You know, Matt, I think you probably coined the phrase that I use all the time, the 10,000 hours phrase, right?
Well, no, I didn't, but
you didn't, but you'll take credit. Yeah. It's such a perfect image, though, because until we've gone through the process enough times and continued to find success, go through the increment, keep doing it. Have you ever seen like images on TV of a landslide or something occurring? Yeah. Over time, erosion, water, all these things, roots that were growing you
can't see some of them.
You can't see it. It all looks perfect. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, kaboom, here comes the landslide. That may have been happening for 10 years, but it didn't happen in a visual sense until right in that moment. Yeah. I really think landslides are a great example of how projects make momentum, monumental leaps forward when everybody doesn't even know, whoa, there was a moment in time. What happened? You couldn't have woken up that day and made that happen. It came because there were a series of smallest incremental steps that were moving forward. And to be honest with you, Matt, people get overwhelmed thinking about big steps. They can't take big steps. If I told you go out today and lose 15 pounds, you can't do it. It's just not possible. But if I told you go out and start walking 2 miles a day for the next year, guess what would happen? Just a simple example of how a little small incremental change can make a big change really occur. And we talk a lot about change because breakthrough is change, right? Breakthrough leadership is about change. It's about you identifying where you are and the vision of where you want to be. But in between there is this huge gap, is this big gap where usually we find breakdown, right, instead of breakthrough. Because when things happen, we get off the edge of that cliff and we're looking for that next big step. We want to run and jump a big hurdle to the next, when in reality it's a process of building one little step at a time, building one little step at a time, and continuing to migrate from where you are to where you want to be. You know, there's a big process to figuring out what that step should be, but I would argue that it should be the absolute smallest step you can even imagine. Right,
so if we're getting ready to get ready, that's not where we want to be.
No.
But and I think this is a neat tip to say, if you have the smallest possible increment that you are currently doing, you're going to feel some momentum. And so if you don't feel momentum today, That's one thing that you want to look at is, are we really pursuing the biggest possible step? You know, another thing about the smallest increment is it becomes this uncompromising moment. Like, we have got to do this.
That's beautiful.
If all else fails today, we're going to have this happen today and every day. And in doing that, so we have momentum, and now we're uncovering what we need to know as we go. So what's so powerful about having this uncompromising type of activity, this uncompromising action that we're going to do? Why is that so important?
Well, we've all seen the people out there. Maybe we've been those people in certain environments where we're always, we're talking about this project, this big overwhelming thing we're going to get done. And then you talk to them 3 years later and they're still talking about the same thing. Now, I can't relate to that because I'm a let's do it, let's fail, or let's succeed, let's just do something. That's kind of my mentality. But you've all seen, people who would do that. But I would say you could be successful today by taking one step in the direction of your success. You've got that vision, you see it clearly, you don't know what to do, but you can figure out one tiny thing to do. And why would you do that? Have you ever heard of the flywheel effect, Matt?
Yeah, of course.
Pretty universal, right?
But in case people don't know, what is it?
Yeah. Well, a flywheel, in a piece of equipment, a flywheel is basically something that is eccentric. It has its weight is off center, so it doesn't just move really smoothly. It creates, you use them in a lot of these presses that create a kaboom, boom, boom, boom. That's the flywheel. It kicks in and it cams over and it forces this momentum. But to get that flywheel going is often a very slow process. In our lives, what we're looking for is the ability to execute in big strokes that are meaningful. But in order to get that flywheel moving, it takes little bitty strokes. There's a little bitty belt driving a little bitty pulley that just continues to go until that big flywheel starts to move. It's kind of like a moving freight train type of situation. You don't see, they don't just go 0 to 60. You don't ever hear anybody talk about the time for a freight train to go 0 to 60, right? That's just not what it's about. But when the momentum's going, look at the weight they can haul. Look at what they've done to transform our entire nation. That's what you're doing when you start creating momentum by taking small incremental steps that gain traction.
So what we're asserting here is that when you aim for the really big steps in your, you try to get it all planned out ahead of time and just succeed. If there's either failure or success, that gets you into a lot of trouble. But if you have the smallest possible increment that you're, again, no compromises every day pursuing, like I'm going to do this no matter what. Like you said, I'm going to walk a mile every day no matter what, even if I'm busy. I'm going to make that sales call no matter what, even if I'm busy. There's that. If you want to be a writer, they always talk about writing every day. If you want to be an athlete, you always talk about shooting so many free throws every day. But whatever that is, and so we're saying identify the constant effort that needs to be applied.
Yeah, beautiful.
But when you do that, why do you think that helps you go faster? Why do the smaller steps help you go faster?
Well, I got a confession to make, man. I'm not a very good swimmer. That's something I'm really wanting to change. I didn't grow up swimming like my wife did, but I've noticed that when we're at the lake or we're in the swimming pool, she can just be in the pool and look like she's not even doing anything, and she's just standing there talking and barely moving her arms. Yeah. And she's either treading water or she's moving across the pool. It just looks so graceful and so efficient. And when I do it, my kids say things like, the undertow, the undertow in the pool, Dad, when you're treading water is almost too much, Why? Because I'm working so hard to accomplish these big things. Yeah. But learning the small, efficient moves that create the momentum and the movement, that's really where efficiency comes from. I'm thinking, one of the things that I've been doing, as we talk about, it's almost funny because I'm not exactly your prototypical runner, distance runner, but it's one of the things I'm doing for my health. And I was talking with my daughter-in-law about running, who's an incredibly proficient and decorated, if you can say it that way. She's a racer and she's really good. And here I am thinking, you just go out and run, right? You just go run. You see where you're going, you just go. And I start learning things like, no, it's not about having a longer stride. It's about having a faster turnover, doing it on a more repetitive basis.
Small, efficient moves.
Small, efficient moves. If you're going to be a distance runner, you got to shorten that stride to the point where you can do about 180 beats per minute.
Right.
And I can't do 180 beats per minute if I'm trying to take these big steps, these big strides. Well, guess what happens? It prevents injury.
Yep.
Which is big when you're my age, right? It prevents injury. It makes you more efficient. It uses less air to go a further distance, and it creates more speed with less energy. And that's really what we're talking about doing in the business world, right? And in life and in creating change and breakthrough. We're talking about what are the most efficient steps we can take repetitively, continually, consistently to get these massive results. I think it starts all the way back with learning the efficiency of just taking the small steps.
Right. So in terms of what we're asserting today is the small steps make a big difference. How do you leverage it? Number one, you just said, which is to identify the small, efficient moves. And this is on your one concept. We'll talk more about that in a second. The second thing, though, is to learn by doing, to not get stuck in the over-planning. We're not saying you shouldn't have plans. You should have plans. You should have a vision. We didn't say you shouldn't have a vision. It's not that. It's just that getting ready to get ready isn't helpful, so we got to learn by doing. When you learn by doing, isn't it true that you're going to uncover some things you couldn't possibly have anticipated in the back office making a spreadsheet?
Yeah, there's just no substitute for actually doing something.
Right.
In some of the first opportunities I've had to go out and to tell my story and to speak in large public settings. Well, I make all these plans. I know exactly what I'm going to say. I've rehearsed it and everything else. I walk away from the first event and I say, okay, now I get it. Now I know.
Now I know what I need to know.
Now I know what I need to know. You're not going to know that until you do it. You're just not going to know. And so don't set yourself up by failure by trying to attack something in a massive way. Attack it in small, bite-sized increments that you can be successful, and then you can adjust. Measure, monitor, adjust, control, all those things. They're all little increments. It's like climbing a mountain. That's another one of the examples I love to visualize when it comes to the increment. Because every step, you're getting a new foothold. You're making sure you're solid before you try to reach on up higher. But you consistently do that all the way through the process, you gain momentum.
Yep.
You don't just try to jump and grab a ledge somewhere, right? I mean, there's too much risk involved. But
and that's another good example, because you're not going to sit at the base and say that's exactly what I'm going to do and nothing different. You're going to get up there and find it's not exactly what it looked like at the bottom.
Even if you watched somebody else do it, it's not going to be the same.
We had a mutual friend, John Nimmo, told the story about him and his wife. From a distance, the mountain looks perfectly small. Yeah. On top of the mountain, not so much. So number one, small, efficient moves. Number two, learn by doing. Number three is, and I love this one, I've heard it different places, but that is never leave the side of a decision. So if we have a strategy, if we have a vision, if we have a plan, what can we do before we even leave the room? This is one that I think is very practical for meetings. We decided, we figured out what the smallest, no compromise constant is, and then from there we literally made that phone call, sent that email, did something very practical, very small, but now we already have momentum, right?
Oh, that's powerful. That's beautiful. We've chalked the wheels up on that thing. Now we're just removing the chalks, right? We didn't, it's not done.
It's not done.
But we released it.
Yep.
We released it by making decisions, taking action on the decisions we made.
And you can leverage momentum.
That's beautiful.
And so the final thing I would say, and you kind of hinted at this, Greg, is the fifth thing that I would say is if it's not working, if you try to do the smallest possible increment, it's just not working, kind of getting the feedback of resistance, it's a little bit overwhelming, you're not doing it consistently. If it's not working, what can they do?
There's two sides to that issue, Matt, that really need to be clarified. One is most of the things you do aren't going to show results immediately. If you're looking at an incremental step, I've so many times I've talked in team building situations where you're trying to develop trust, you're trying to build relationships with your team. Those things don't happen immediately, even if you're doing exactly the right things. We talk about some of the disciplines that we work with people on in their organizational skills, in their hiring and firing and reviewing skills. Those things don't happen without consistent repetition over and over. So don't be too quick to decide that something's not working.
That's good.
But there are times on the other side of the coin that you're doing something and you're learning as you do it, right? You're learning a better way to do it. The smaller steps give you a chance to adapt and find your way to the correct steps, rather than making such a large step that you have to backtrack in order to go a different direction. And that's really important, especially when there are teams involved, when there are organizations involved, where you could make steps that could create uncertainty if you make too big of a step without allowing an opportunity for it to settle in. The small incremental steps show intent. They show the power of momentum. They show that you're doing what you said you're doing and you're helping them to do it, but you're not creating unrealistic expectations. And frankly, that you haven't lost your mind. You haven't lost your mind.
Right.
You're out there doing things, showing the momentum that's going to move you all toward this vision. You're going to identify it. You're going to adapt, and through all of that, you're going to gain the confidence of your people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we could talk much more about all these different components of how to leverage the incremental. But just to recap, we said the smallest possible moves, identify what the constant is, and focus on the small, efficient moves. Number 2 is learn by doing. Number 3 is never leave the side of a decision without actually taking action. Do it right away is number 4. And the 5th one is if it's not working, don't give up, because the increments do take time, but also make sure that you have made it as small as possible. So ask yourself, what's the number one thing that must happen without exception to achieve your vision? And then what's your plan to stay constant? Greg, thanks so much for your thoughts on this, and we hope you'll see you guys in the next Breakthrough Leadership video blog.